Good morning, everybody that's joining. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Meredith, and Monday to Friday, I jump on here around this time. It is 9:45 a.m. Eastern United States, and I'm doing a tutorial. I usually pick one project a week, and we work on that project together throughout the week. This week is Miscellaneous Stitch Week, so each day I've done a different stitch. We've done the cat stitch, we've done an elephant quarter, what else have we done? We did flowers in a row, cat stitch, elephant quarter, flowers in a row. Yesterday we did a loop stitch. And today we are going to attempt to do broomstick lace. And I teach based upon the principle that if you can hold your yarn and you can hold your hook and yarn over and pull through a loop, you can do just about anything. It's a matter of sequencing those movements and sequencing the stitches you make from them. If you want to see previous tutorials, you can head on over to my YouTube channel at NiftyKnotz, the playlist NiftyKnotz Talk. It's a playlist / podcast, and after I do my lives in the mornings, all my chatter, unedited, answering questions, anything else like that, I just upload them to YouTube so you can go back and rewatch them at your pace, rewatch the parts you want to rewatch, skip through the parts that you don't want to watch, and yeah. I'm going to grab my kitchen chair because that seemed to work well yesterday for showing stitches. So I can jump back and forth. So I can talk to you and then behind you to do the stitch so that you can see it. So I didn't really pick a color. It's my gnome. It's my crochet buddy. If you're talking to us, I can't hear you. Can you hear me now? I'm connected. Yes. Oh, okay. So today, we're going to try some broomstick lace. I think I'm going to use the same gray because that seemed to work well yesterday. And I left my scissors. Sit on my table. So broomstick lace. Broomstick lace is basically called broomstick lace because when they started making it, the women would use their broomsticks as their gauge to wrap their yarn around. We're not using a broomstick. We're using this one is a 35. This is a number 35. So it's basically a, I do believe it's a 23 millimeter or 25 millimeter. I don't know. I don't really have my, this one's in inches. It doesn't have centimeters at all. But it's just one gigantic knitting needle, and that's what I'm going to use to do my broomstick lace. Yesterday we determined that if you wanted to try it, if you liked it, a turkey baster would probably be closest to the same size and width and shape that you needed to do the stitch with. So, jumping into broomstick lace. Sorry about that, let my dog out. I'm going to put this aside for a moment. And I'm going to work my base chain. Oh, this is not good. I picked gray yarn, I have gray on. How about blue? Blue will work. So to do broomstick lace, broomstick lace is done on multiples of 5. So, holding your yarn, holding your hook, and chaining, you're going to chain multiples of 5. So 1, 4, 5, 15, so I'm going to do 25. That way I can, I'll show the stitch 5 times. Hey Tyler. And I'm going to chain 1 for my height, and I'm going to single crochet all the way across my 25 stitches. For those of you that didn't hear me earlier, this is Miscellaneous Stitch Week. So every day we've gone through a different stitch, and then I've uploaded these lives to YouTube. I do like to start my stitches out on a base of single crochet. It's a little bit sturdier than showing you the fidgetiness, that's a word, of trying to work into the base chain. It's a little bit easier to see when I'm working into a base of single crochets. So I'm going to single crochet across once. After I single crochet all the way across once, I'm going to single crochet all the way across one more time. So while I'm doing this, and I have again my base of 5 stitches, multiples of 5 stitches. So I have 25 stitches that I'm working here. So how is everybody this morning? Thank you for everybody that's joining. I appreciate it. Who else is here? Let's see. I'm not sure who else is here. Let's see. I hear the puppers. Yes, you hear the puppers. You hear my crazy puppers. Which he's been, I gave him his treats. He should be leaving me alone, but instead he's not. Although he seems to have settled back there on his bed. So maybe he'll leave me alone for a little bit. Alright, I have my first row of single crochet done. And I do this with you. These are like crochet longs. Most of what I do is going to be either free-handed or something that I'm teaching or reteaching myself to do. So I'm doing it right along with you. And broomstick lace actually does not look that hard. And it does look very pretty. So almost, the hardest 2 rows are always the first 2 rows. And again, I'm just doing a base of a single crochet. So I'm inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling through my stitch, yarning over and pulling through 2 loops. So that would be US standard terms. Inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling through my stitch, yarning over, pulling through my 2 loops. And I have multiples of 5, so I have 25. And we're going to see how this goes. Alrighty. Almost down to the end. Okay. So I have my base of multiples of 5. So we're going to jump into this. Or did I just put my hook or my needle? Grab my needle. I think I'm going to do the first row in front of you this way so that I can see what I'm doing and then I'll do the next row of it backwards so that you can see it, just my hands. So I'm actually, maybe I should just turn everything around. That way you can watch me. Let's me flip my camera here. There goes everything. Flip my camera. Alrighty. Alright. Grab my needle. See if I can manage to do this. Because technically, you would want to hold your knitting needle in front of you. So I'm going to turn, and this first row is actually kind of worked backwards. So I'm going to pull up my loop. This is why I said it might be easier for me to, and I'm going to put it on my crochet hook, or on my knitting needle. And with my yarn in the back, so that was the first stitch. I'm going to pull it tight. Oh, this is going to be so fidgety. I'm just going to give you an idea of what I'm doing, and then I will flip this camera around because this is going to drive me crazy trying to do this with all this. So I'm going to insert my hook. Backwards. This is what I mean by it's going to be fidgety because I can't hold the knitting needle. So I'm going to insert my hook. I'm going to yarn over and pull my loop through, and I'm going to stretch it over, and I'm going to put it on there on my knitting needle, and then I'm going to pull it even, and then holding my yarn the same way I would, I'm going to go into the next loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and just put it on my needle and snug it up tight. So I'm going to do that all the way across. Pull up my loop. And I honestly don't think it matters which way you put it on your needle, whether it's twisted or not twisted. Let's see if I can secure this some way. Prop it in between some things here. So I'm going to go into my next stitch, and again I'm still going to hold my yarn the way I would normally hold my yarn. So I'm going to go into the next stitch, I'm going to yarn over, pull up my loop, put it right on my knitting needle. So you're kind of working backwards for that first row. So that's the loop we just pulled. This one, I'm going to go into it, I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull up my loop, and I'm going to put it on my knitting needle. So I'm going to go into the next one, and again, I'm holding my yarn the same way I would hold it to crochet, so then I'm going to actually just pull yarn over and pull up my loop, and then my camera's going to be fidgety, and I'm going to pull up my loop. I would say that when you're pulling up your loop and you're putting it on your needle, just be consistent with the way that you do it. And by being consistent, I mean after you've gone into your next stitch and you've yarned over and pulled up your loop, if you've been putting it on your hook this way, put it on your hook this way. If you've been twisting it and putting it on your hook this way, be consistent. That way your stitches are all consistent. Put it on your needle and then pull your... So now so far we've done a loop through every single stitch so far. And we're just going to continue going through this one we just did. This is the next one. And then grabbing your yarn, pulling it through your stitch, pulling your loop up taller, putting it over your knitting needle, and pulling it snug. Doesn't have to be too snug, but it doesn't. You don't want it to be too loose either. Shouldn't about technique. Okay, go ahead. What is your question? Yes. Can you guys hear me? You're muted. I'm not muted. Not on my end. Cindy, you can hear me? Okay. Give me 1 second here. I will be right back, guys, for those of you that can hear me. All right. Hopefully that fixed that problem. Cindy, are you still there? Everybody else still there? Everybody else that's joining? Cindy, I cannot apologize more. That issue should be null and void at this point. Good, Janie. I do apologize for that. Those comments are inappropriate and not what I want here on my. I know, but it's still my video, so I will still apologize. But I'm glad you guys are still here. Okay, so again, I'm just going to work the rest of the way around. Grab my loop, pull up my loop, put it on my knitting needle, into the next stitch. Just my gray hairs. Into the next stitch. I'm going behind my knitting needle and pulling up my loop. And it's hard to show from, it's a little bit hard to show from any angle actually. I'm going to put it on my knitting needle. And I'm going to keep going across like that. So I'm going to do my best to stay in the frame here. So this first row is actually kind of worked backwards, I guess. Pull up my loop, put it on my knitting needle, and then pull it tight. Okay, this is getting a little bit better. It's not quite so fidgety as you go, because you can kind of hang on to it. Pull up my loop, put it on my knitting needle, pull it snug. All right, I think I'm getting the hang of this now. I will say that it does take a little bit, it is a little bit fidgety, but I think I'm getting it. one of the main things that you need to do is you need to keep, like, don't collect your stitches down here. Your loops that you're making, your long loops. Don't collect them up here on the point because they'll be too shorter. Yeah, this is really interesting. I have never done this stitch ever before in my life. So you want to collect your stitches on the fat part of your knitting needle so that they all stay relatively consistent. So I only have a few more to go, so I might as well just do them here. This is really interesting. Like, you have to hold your knitting needle like you're holding your tension yarn. But it is doable. So I'm going to pull up my loop, and then I'm going to pull it tighter. But I agree with you, this is very interesting. I might like this. It might be a lot easier if I'm sitting with it in my lap. Again, I'm going to grab my yarn from the back and pull my loop through my stitch. Put it on my knitting needle. Slide it down. You have yours ready. Well, you have all your loops on your needle already. I'm not that quick. At least from this angle, I'm not. I'm almost there. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 more to go. Yeah, I think it's a 25. Everything that I've read says 25 millimeter. I don't know if this is 25 or 23. A couple of things that I read said 23. And I'm thinking that with this, depending on how big you want your lace to be, you could use an even bigger one if you wanted to use an even bigger one. Or a dowel rod would probably work really well. If you're going to buy dowel rods, though, buy them from Walmart or buy them from the hardware store. They're a lot less expensive than buying them from a craft store. All right, I'm on the last stitch here. All right, thank God for that, because trying to do it from this angle is a little bit odd. Trying to hold it and do everything. All right, so I should have 25. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25. So I do. So I have one giant loop for each stitch. So that's the front, and that's what the back looks like. One giant stitch for each loop. And I guess if I didn't want that ridge on the back, I could probably just do through the top loop there. But I'm kind of doing it the way... Good morning, Billy Dawn. She's not teaching. I'm sorry. Thank you for answering that question. The size in millimeters, which I did think I did grab that, was 25. Oh, I get it now. She's not teaching, that's why she was faster. Yeah, let me tell you what. Trying to hold and like look through the camera while you're doing things is not as easy as people make it look. It really is not. Okay. Now we're actually going to turn and we're going to, well, this is the way we did. So we worked the opposite direction for the first row of stitches. And now we're going to work the right direction for the way you'd normally crochet for the next set of stitches. So I'm going to gather these up here, and I'm going to grab the first, if you push them down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 5 loops on there, and if you push them down to the beginning of your needle there, you can get your hook underneath that pretty easy. And then I'm going to slide these all off. And working with just this set of 5, I'm going to pick up my yarn from the back. So I have all my loops on my hook. I have my working yarn that I'm holding in the back like I would normally do. And I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull through once, and I'm going to chain. And that's going to be the beginning of the row. So now that I've done that, I'm going to look to where I pulled through those loops and chained. And you can see where I've done that. And now I'm going to work 5 single crochets into that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's our first stitch. So the chain 1, this is terrible. Is that any better? The chain 1 that I did here, so the slip stitch in chain 1 was like the beginning of your turning row where you would add the height. And then I did my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. You turn on the light, see if it's any better. A little bit. I'm sorry, I keep bumping that from this direction. So that was our first stitch. So we're only going to do the slip stitch in chain 1 in the very edge of this, the very first stitch of this. So now I'm going to take my needle, my knitting needle, and with my yarn again behind it, I'm going to slide the next 5 stitches down and pick them up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is my loop for my working yarn, and I have the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops from my knitting needle on this. And I am just going to show you from this angle so you can see it. Instead of pulling everything, instead of yarning over and pulling through everything as a slip stitch, I'm going to yarn over. I don't know how to do this where it's not so finicky. There you go. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull through just those 5 loops, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through the 2 loops to make a single crochet. And then I'm going to pull them apart so I can see where I've done that single crochet, and that counts as my first one. And it's going to be 2 in the same space, 3 in the same space, 4 in the same space, 5 in the same space. So now I have 2 stitches. You can see how I must have twisted my stitches there because they don't look as nice as the first one there. Oh, come on, my camera doesn't want to focus. La la la. Alright, so on to the next 5. So I'm going to do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sorry, I don't know why this isn't focusing. 1, whoops, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the loop on my working loop. And I'm going to pick up 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to slide these off. I'm going to pick up my working yarn, and I'm going to do a single crochet right into those. So I'm just going to yarn over and go through the 5 loops that are on there, and then I'm going to yarn over and go through the 2 loops to make my first single crochet, more gray hairs. That shows up on the camera. So then I'm going to look for where I put that first single crochet, and I'm going to do 4 more. So there's always going to be 5 single crochets. If I pull off 5 loops, I'm going to do 5 single crochets. And I would imagine oh, trust me, this is like, I've never done this before, so this is, but I mean, honestly, I'm not doing anything different than holding my yarn and holding my hook and yarning over and pulling through. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's my row so far. When my hand's close, it won't focus. When it's really close, it does focus. So that's so far. So all we're doing is then again, I'm a knitter. Crochet is so hard. I've been knitting for 35 years. I've been crocheting for about 50 years, and I did teach myself how to knit, but crochet is like, that's what I learned how to do first. So it always seemed so simple to me. But when I try to teach it to people, like my grandson and my son taught himself how to knit, and then he wanted to learn how to crochet. It was very odd to him because he didn't like the way he had to hold the stitches. Okay, so again, I have my 5 stitches, and I have my working loop, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches on there, my working loop on there, and I'm just going to go from behind. Oops, don't want to lose it. Don't want to lose it at this point. And I'm going to draw through the first 5 loops. I know gray probably would have been better. And then finish off my single crochet. And I'm going to find the center where I did that first single crochet. And I'm going to do 4 more. 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm just going to do the last 5 stitches here. I'm going to pick up the last 5 loops onto my hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank God I can put that down now. Here's my working loop with my working thread behind, and I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull through the 5 loops that I picked up. I'm going to yarn over and finish my single crochet, and then I'm going to look for my center, and I'm going to do 4 more single crochets in there to make my 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the gifts. So now I have my last one there. I'm not sure how I would start that so that would look different. Unless I started, I don't know. So that's my first row. And now I'm going to flip my camera back so that you guys kind of have the gist of that. ER Nurse Lady, it's beautiful. Thank you very much. So you kind of get the idea that you're going to now go backwards. So you're going to have to chain 1 here at the end. Oh, actually, you don't have to chain one there at the end. You can just pull this loop up and put it on your knitting needle and count that as your first stitch. And then go into the second stitch to pick up your next loop and put it on your knitting needle. So you would go into the second stitch and pull up your loop and put that on your knitting needle. I'm going to flip my camera so that maybe I can get a better, thank you very much, get a better view of how I could probably actually hold this to be a little bit more comfortable so it wasn't so fidgety. I kind of like that stitch, but I would definitely have to spend some time working with it to accommodate how I like to do things. Get myself untangled here. Really untangled here. I'm always tangled. All right. Thank you very much for the gifts. I appreciate them. Really do. All right. So now, if I haven't thoroughly confused you and you wanted to go back and watch the first part of that, you can go back and watch that. I'll have it uploaded by this evening or by this afternoon. Okay, so now I'm going to figure out some way to hold this so that I can do it a little bit quicker and it doesn't look so fidgety. So first I'm going to pull up my first loop and I'm going to put my first loop on there, and that counts as my first stitch. So that counts as my first stitch. So the last single crochet that I made would be the first stitch, and that counts as it. So I'm going to go into the next stitch. So I'm going to pull this tight, and I'm going to go into the next stitch, and I'm just going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull up this loop, I'm going to put it on my knitting needle, and I'm going to pull that so that these stitches are kind of an even tension. So I'm going to go into the next stitch. This is definitely a stitch I would have to practice that if I wanted to do something larger so it wouldn't drive me nuts. Maybe if I hold it in between my knees. Oh, that seems to work. If I cross my legs the other way, I can hold it between my knees. That seems to work a little bit better. I'm going to go into the next stitch. I'm going to pull up my loop. I'm going to put it on there. Oh, that does work much better. I'm going to put it into my next stitch. I'm going to pull up my loop, put it on my needle, into my next stitch, pull up my loop, put it onto my needle. This works much better this way, being able to hold this a little bit steady between my legs. Pull up my next loop, put it on my needle. Okay, so for as complicated as it looked and felt the first time, this is much easier to actually sit and do it without having to really hold on to everything. So I am going to then go all the way across and just making sure I'm putting my loops on in the same direction. These are going to be a little bit uneven, but that's okay. So if I've done 5 single crochets in the top of each of my loops, I should then, and I did 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I should then again have 25 stitches. I don't know what to do about that first stitch there. I would have to figure that out unless you just started with your chain stitch. I don't know. When I get to the end, I'll see if I can fix that somehow, because this is the way it says to do it, and again, I'm learning it with you guys. crocheting right along with you guys, learning something, or when we do projects, I freehand them. So you do get a lot of chatter. You do hear a lot of my thought process. I can now see why my mother said this was a pain to do. But at the same time, I can also see how that you could like build a rhythm to get it a little bit easier. Did I do that loop in the same stitch twice? No. Getting there. Do I have my tongue hanging out of my mouth because I'm concentrating so hard? Am I drooling yet? I wouldn't be surprised. Oops. Okay, I like this. This is one of those things I would do just because I had to concentrate, and it would like keep me occupied. But it's also one of these things that I don't think I could do if I was in the mood to just do something. You know, sometimes you're in the mood to just do something and not have to count and not have to pay attention. I don't think this would be. Alright, I'm down to the end here, so I'm going to count my stitches and see how many I have so far. I seem to be doing this tight like I do everything else. 1, 2, 7, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, so down to my last stitch. Now I'm trying to figure out how I would even that up there. Because this is like really loose and like this is like really tight. Maybe it would be just something I would have to adjust my tension when I was doing my stitches, my lace stitches. I don't know. Alright, well, either way, I'm going to finish up my 5 stitches. That's something I can figure out another day. Oh, I'll figure it out now. So let's see. If I pulled up, if I turned it this way, so if I turned it the right way and then just did maybe a double crochet in the end here, and then after I did that double crochet, flipped it around and then pulled that loop up, it might like even it out on the side there. So I just turned it so it was working the right way, and then I just did like an extra double crochet at the end, and then I just pulled the loop up to the top there. I don't know, we'll see. This is, am I missing comments again? Am I like lost in my own little world here? Because I'm trying to teach myself as well as you guys. I didn't know the name and I called it the wave. That's not drooling. Oh, that's a good thing. Old friend back in the day used an old broomstick made of knitting needles exactly for the stitch. Yep, that's why it was called broomstick lace, because they used broomsticks. but that's the name of the stitch because they would use a broomstick to pull up their loops instead of us using a fancy 50-year-old knitting needle that's all discolored. And that is what it is. Okay, so now on to the next part of it, which should be a lot easier holding it this way as well. So I'm going to push all my stitches up a little bit, and I'm going to grab the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, grabbing them. It doesn't matter if you grab them from the front or the back because you're going to take them off. And for this very first stitch, you're going to slip stitch and chain 1, just like you would at the end of your rows, how you would chain 1 when you turn to give your height. You want to slip stitch and chain 1 in there to give you your height for your next set of single crochets. And you're going to do 5 single crochets in that first set of loops. 2, 3, 4, 5. So into the same loop I have my 5 single crochets. And then I'm going to take the next 5 off my needle and put them onto my hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have those 5 loops on there. It is much easier when you can stabilize that knitting needle. So I have my 5 loops on there, and I have my working loop with my working yarn. And this time I'm not going to do the slip stitch chain 1. I'm just simply going to do a single crochet, but I'm going to count all 5 of these as 1. So I'm going to pull through the first 5 loops and then pull through, yarn over and pull through that loop there, and then look for my center where I did my stitch and do 4 more single crochets there. 2, 3, 4, I went 5 total. That's 5 total. So I got 5 total there on top of that one. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take off my next 5. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoops. I have my working yarn in the front. My working yarn is supposed to be in the back. So I'm just going to grab those stitches so I can move my working yarn to the back. Okay. I'm going to cinch up my working loop. I'm going to count all those first 5 loops that I took off my knitting needle as 1 loop, and I'm going to pull through all 5, and then I'm going to pull through my single crochet and finish off my 5 stitches. That's 1 that I just did, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I have another stitch. Then I'm going to do the same thing. This time I have to make sure I hold my yarn behind me. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my working loop, my 5 loops from my knitting needle. I'm going to pull through the 5 loops from my knitting needle. I'm going to pull through the 1 loop, or the other 2 loops to create my single crochet. I'm going to spread those stitches out there so I can see where I got it in the center, and finish off 2, 3, 4, 5. You told me I wasn't drooling. Was I sitting there with my tongue hanging out? tend to do that too. Sit there and thinking so hard. Alright, on to the last 5 stitches. So I'm going to go through all those 5 stitches, and I'm going to pull them back, again with my working yarn behind it. Put that thing down. Pull them up again, and again working through the 5 loops is 1. I'm going to yarn over and pull through those first 5 loops, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through those 2 to finish my single crochet. I'm going to split my loops there so I can see where I did my single crochet, and then I'm going to finish it off 2, 3, 4, 5. This will definitely take me some practice. Because I'm actually thinking that I would probably like that double crochet on the end on each side, but I'm just like picky like that. But I mean, I guess you could just do the lace part all the way up. If you started from a chain, it wouldn't be, this probably was one that I could start from a chain. It was just easier for me to hold and work with starting from the single crochet. But if you started with the chain, it would pull it together. Your loops are a tad long. It's intriguing. It is intriguing. I'm not sure if I like this stitch so far. Your loops are a tad long. But when you stretch it, they look fine. Yeah. See, I think my loops are a tad tight. So that's like the front of it. And like I said, if you didn't want the back of it to look like that, you could probably just pick up, like I have this from where I picked up my loops. Because when you pick up your loops, just to show you an example, because when you insert your stitch, and this is just an example, and you pick up your loop, you have the whole stitch on the back side there. So I think to eliminate that, you could probably just go through, when you're picking up your loops, to eliminate the ridges on the back, you could just go through maybe the top loop there to pick up your stitches, and it would give you less of that ridge look on the back. Yeah, you can make a baby blanket with it. My mother made a baby blanket for one of my cousins when I was much younger, and I can remember it was yellow. It was really pretty, but she did like a couple rows of this, and then she did a couple rows of like a regular stitch or a shell stitch, maybe would probably be in between there, would even that out a little bit maybe. And then she did like rows, she did different rows. So yeah, I can see why people would like it. One row is almost an inch, but you do need to stay focused. It would work up really fast, and I can tell you from after doing the second row, it gets less fidgety and it gets a lot easier. So I think this is probably something that I would really like to do. I was trying to watch how other people do it, and one of the people that did it mentioned working in the rounds, and I thought to myself, how would you do this in a round? Because if you were working in a round, how would you get all your round stitches and pull up all your loops in a round if you have a straight needle or a straight broomstick? Like, I don't understand. Always learning something, always trying something different. Yeah, I would definitely have to stay focused, and I think I would definitely just do it in the top loop of my stitches so that I wouldn't get that ridge on the back, because I'm not sure I like that ridge on the back. I mean, I'm sure that I could make it like that if I wanted to do it on purpose, but I don't think if I was not doing it on purpose, I would like that ridge on the back. Excuse me. So I think I would just probably pull up my loops on the top loop. So this is the way you would be looking at it. I would just pull my loops up, insert my hook and pull my loops up through the top loop. It looks very pretty in that color. It does look very pretty. I kind of like really like that stitch, but that's, I would kind of really have to practice that. I think I would like it a little bit longer. I think I would probably use something bigger. I'm trying to look around my house. I would probably use something bigger to make my loops. I have a little bit of everything in my house. So I'm going to do one more round making like maybe a bigger loop and just working in those top loops of my stitches to see what it looks like. Whoops. And I'm actually going to use a couple of different tubes here. I think I'm going to use this one. These are not quite as large as a wrapping paper roll, and it's coated. My son was using them to make rockets. They're like rocket pieces, but it is bigger than this, significantly. So this is my experiment. And again, I like to experiment when I'm sitting here doing this because it just shows you that you can play with these stitches too, and you can do kind of whatever just to see how you like to do it yourself. Okay, so I'm going to turn my work around. I have an itch. And I'm going to pull up this first loop. And I'm going to put it on my tube. Okay, that's my first stitch. So now the second stitch, instead of going through both loops of the stitch, I'm just going to go through the very top loop of this stitch. So it would be like you were working through the back loops. So I'm just going through this loop back here, this loop on top. So if you're looking at it, it would be this loop here, instead of working through both loops in the stitch. Yeah, plastic pipes, different sizes, that's what I mean. Like whoops, there's something on the end of that. That's what I mean, you know, just play, just doodle, just see how things, you know, how you like things. So I'm going to see how fast I can do a row of this. Probably not very. But I'm going to see if I like it through the back loops only a little bit better. Which I can already tell I probably am. I can't tell if that's somebody's television or if it's somebody outside my house. I can hear talking. Okay, so I'm just doing the same thing I did with the knitting needle, only I'm putting it over this tube. And I am only working through the back loop as I'm looking at it, so I don't get quite that huge ridge. So let's see here. I am trying to be consistent with how I put my loops on my tube or knitting needle, whatever you're using. It's getting there. It still feels a little fidgety even after the second row, but I can tell that it's definitely getting a little bit easier, and I'm kind of getting like the hang of it, like your rhythm, like how it works for you and how it's easiest for you to hold and manipulate it. It does kind of remind me of knitting. It also kind of reminds me of like Tunisian crochet, but at the same time they're still really different. This is almost like you're casting on knitting stitches. But then when you take them off, it's almost like you're doing sort of like a Tunisian crochet. I don't know. That's another one that's really odd to me, is Tunisian crochet. Has anybody here ever tried it? Yeah, it is easier if I hold it like a knitting needle. I was trying not to make that reference because I know a lot of people, not everybody knits, but it is easier if you hold it like your knitting needle. And then just pull up your loop and put it on. I'm just dropping them just because I don't have that. If I were going to do this with a bigger, I probably wouldn't choose a tube. I would probably buy myself a giant dowel rod and sharpen the end of it just a little bit so that I could get it over the top a little bit easier instead of having to stretch the loop all the way around. That's a little bit more difficult than it was to pull it over the tip of the knitting needle. All right. 3 more stitches to go. I would have to figure out and find a pattern how that you could make that. Like I said, unless you just started with a chain, because I started with a single crochet and it seemed like it was too loose at the bottom. So I don't know if you like just started with your chain or if there's some way to do the edges. I would have to like look into that and figure that out. But this is how you would do the actual stitch. Again, I'm learning as you're learning, to show you that like I'm still learning, but I still really am just holding my yarn and holding my hook. Yeah, yes. Made ear warmers with a Tunisian crochet. It makes a thicker fabric. It does make a thicker fabric. Make it pointed like a knitting needle. I would have to like sand down the edge of it. But yeah, you can see that even I take my time to learn things. And I have to remind myself that I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still holding my yarn, holding my hook, you know, doing the same basic things. It's just a little bit different. All right, so first 5 stitches, first 5 loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is one of those stitches that I could probably do an entire freaking week. Is that right? Yeah, because then I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to slip stitch through it, chain 1 because it's my first one. And then I'm going to do my 5 single crochets into it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to take off the next 5 stitches, next 5 loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoops. Get them all the way they're supposed to be, so I have my working and then I have my 5. Hold them a little bit tight, pull through the first 5, do my first single crochet, make sure I'm getting it in the loop, same loop, 2, 3, 4, 5, take off the next 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I have my 5, and I have my working yarn. You're looking at it from the back. I'm going to pull through my 5 loops, finish my single crochet, pull my loops open so I'm getting in the same spot, 2, 3, 4, 5, do the next one. I should have 10 loops left here, do I? I missed a loop somewhere. Okay, we're just going to fudge it. We're just going to put the 4 on, since somewhere I missed a loop or added a loop. Took too many off at some point, so I'm just going to do 4 this time. This is just my practice piece, so I can pretty much do whatever I want with it. And to be honest with you, I don't think anybody would notice anyway. 2, 3, 4, 5. Take off my last 5 onto my needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can actually, if they look a little bit uneven like that, you can just pull them and just kind of manipulate those single crochets over top of them. So this would probably be pretty with a shell in between. Make it a little bit straighter. I kind of like it a little bit longer. Makes it look a little bit lacier. It's certainly, my tension is not perfect there. I would definitely have to practice this. But you can see you can pull your stitches through. I would definitely have to practice it. But you can see, I don't know if you can see or not, but the ridge is much less prominent. This is really prominent. The ridge is much less prominent in the back, just going through the top stitch there. And it kind of gives you like definition on the front too, where you see the skipped loops, where we skipped loops and just pulled our loops through the top there. It is pretty. I think maybe after I did, like, that would be one of those stitches where I would definitely have to practice and make a large piece for me to feel comfortable with my tension and comfortable with the fidgetiness The name of this stitch is Broomstick stitch. So it's broomstick lace is what it is. So the idea behind broomstick lace is that to make these loops that you work your lace into, and you can see that looks like really, really neat, doesn't it? And all you really did was pull up loops and do single crochets. I mean, yeah, it was a little bit fidgety, but we really didn't do anything different. We just pulled up our loops and we did our single crochets. The broomstick lace was, they actually would use a broomstick to wrap those loops around to make that, to make those big loops, and that's thus the name broomstick lace. But I will have to say that is the first time I've ever done that. I would have to think about real hard, would I really want it to look like that before? Or I would just have to just suck it up and just decide that I was just going to sit there and do it for a couple of evenings and get myself used to it, because that was, it's definitely different. But you could see how you could take that and you could, because I've done like a couple of shorter rows, I've done a longer row. You can see how you could take that and you could put that together. You could put shells in between these and then pick up another set of lace from the back side. Broomstick lace. I had made this stitch but never finished it. Yeah, this was the first time I did it as well. So, and honestly, that's how I like to do my tutorials. I like to do my tutorials where it's like I'm learning as you're learning, because everybody looks at it and says, "Oh, it's so, it looks, you make it look so easy." Well, no, I just took the time to practice. You see how fidgety and how like crazy things look when I do them for the first, second, third time. I mean, I take just as much time as anybody else to learn something new. It's just the practice. So I think I like the process where you guys see how I'm struggling to put things together. Because then you realize that, like, all of us that do it, there are things we struggle with to put together. Constantly thinking, constantly talking myself through something. I don't know. But I could see this like being like a couple rows that are short, a couple rows that are long, a couple rows that are short. I think that would make a pretty stitch. I would have to turn to do some shells. I'm going to do a row of shells across just to kind of see what it would look like. So this would be my, I would do 3 in the first, and then I would single crochet in the top, I think. And I would have to, I would have to do my shell in between them. Or, yeah. So I would come right in between there, in that space there, and do a shell. 1, 2, 3. This is what I mean. I'm going to pull it out and try it again, because I want to keep with my 5 stitches as well. I don't know how I would do that. Maybe just go across 3. I don't know. I would have to really count. I'm just going to play with it right now, but I would have to really count. That's 1, 2. And I don't really feel like counting right now, so I'm just gonna play with it and doodle and see what it looks like with a different stitch on top. Again, you can change the colors in between the rows. 4, 5. I'm doing 5, and then I'm just doing 1 in the top, and then just doing a single crochet. So I'm just doing like a shell in between, and then a single crochet on the top. but I would really have to do the math, and don't really feel like sitting here doing the math right now. So I just did a shell in between that set as well. It kind of pulls everything apart. Going right in between each set of lace there and just doing a shell just to see what it looks like. Just to play, just to doodle. I'm sure there are patterns out there that actually do the math for me. And to be honest with you, the first couple times I did this, I would probably just buy a pattern that did the math for me. So that's what it would look like if you did a shell in between each one. So whereas I have 5 stitches in here, I did 5 stitches in here to do a shell. This was my loops that I did my 5 single crochets, and this was between my lace I put a shell. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could play with it. And that's kind of what I mean by doodle. You just kind of have to doodle. And it's pretty good stretched out. But you can see how, like, you have to do the math, and I did not do the math. I just kind of did the stitches. I don't know. I don't think that was too bad. It's definitely something I would have to take a couple of nights to play with if I was going to actually do something with it. Or knowing how to do it, I would at least now know how to read the pattern. When they were talking about putting the loops on my knitting needle, I would know how to do that. I'm sure you could do the same thing, skipping stitches, maybe. I don't know. Doubling up stitches? I don't know, because I've never done it before. But I would probably definitely buy a pattern and work through a pattern a couple of times. Just because I'm lazy and I don't like to do the math. Or I would just kind of sit here and just see what I could do. I really hope you guys were able to see that. That was definitely a different one for me. Definitely a different one for me. So now I have to figure out a way to photograph it so it looks decent to put up. So that's my doodle for this morning. It looks like a doodle. I stretch it out there. It looks like a doodle. It's all kinds of uneven. All right. So I'm going to call it a morning. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of broomstick lace? The smaller stitches definitely look neater. The bigger stitches look neat too, though. But I would have to agree with you. Thank you. This was very interesting. I would have to agree with you. That was very interesting. It is fun. Oh, you too, Stephanie. I didn't see you jump in. I'm really sorry if I don't acknowledge you guys, if I'm like off in la la land with my yarn here and I don't pay attention and see you guys jumping in. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, I would definitely try to do something with it as well. But it would take me some practice. It's definitely a new thing for me. On that note, I'm going to call it a morning. If you guys want to go back and rewatch my mess there, you have Have a good rest of your day. Enjoyed working along with you. Oh, thank you very much. You guys all have a great day too, and I cannot tell you how much I enjoy you guys in the mornings and in the evenings. And I will be back tonight. I don't have anything to do this afternoon, so I will be back this evening. I meant going out wise. I still have a stack of sewing that needs to be accomplished. A little bit each day. Sewing's much different for me. So, on that note, I will talk to you guys tomorrow, or I will talk to you guys that want to join me later. Thank you.